We're learning new details this morning about the physical state of controversial psychologist and author Jordan Peterson. His family says he's in Russia undergoing what they describe as, quote, an emergency detox.
Things are not going well with Jordan Peterson, and it's worse than you think. As the world still debates on his politics, Jordan Peterson suddenly broke his silence on a medical crisis that turned his famous rules for life into a survival manual. The stakes are no longer about fame or influence.
So we know that Jordan Peterson, this world-renowned, internationally best-selling author, self-help guru, is now in Russia undergoing this detox treatment. And we're getting this information directly from his family, specifically his daughter, Michaela Peterson.
They are about whether the Peterson era is reaching a final and heartbreaking conclusion before the year is out. What exactly is up with this legend? To understand how this global icon reached such a devastating breaking point, we need to trace his steps back to the very beginning, long before he was a household name or a man in pain. Building the Peterson mind. Jordan Peterson grew up in the small town of Fairview, Alberta, a rugged and cold place that taught him early on that life requires a lot of determination. And as a teenager, Peterson was already deeply curious about why people do terrible things to one another. Because he grew up during the height of the Cold War, the idea of the world ending in a nuclear flash was not a movie plot to him. It was a real possibility that kept him up at night. This fear drove him to study the darker side of human nature, trying to understand how ordinary people could be swept up in dangerous movements. His hunger for answers eventually took him all the way to Harvard University. During the 90s, he served as an associate professor, pushing his students to think deeper than they ever had before. While there, he spent years writing his first major book called Maps of Meaning. He was obsessed with figuring out the psychological roots of why we believe what we believe. To his colleagues, he was a brilliant and intense scholar who seemed to be on a mission to map out the human soul. But this man in question was not interested in small talk. He wanted to know why the 20th century was so rugged and how to prevent it from happening again. By the time he returned to Canada to teach at the University of Toronto, Jordan Peterson had become a bit of a local legend. His students remember him as an eccentric professor who could speak for hours about mythology, heroes, and the Soviet Union. He was deeply fascinated by how governments gain absolute control over their citizens. This was not history to him. It was a warning. He worked long hours, taught packed classes, and ran a private clinical practice. Looking back, you have to wonder if this high-pressure lifestyle was already taking a toll. Because he was pushing himself to the limit every single day, perhaps ignoring the physical signs that his body was under immense stress. For nearly 2 decades, Peterson lived the relatively quiet life of a successful academic. He was respected in his field and loved by his students, yet he remained largely unknown to the rest of the world. He had built a fortress of knowledge and a philosophy meant to withstand any storm. However, he had no idea that the quiet hallways of the university were about to become a battlefield. As a single piece of legislation made its way through the Canadian government, it was set to pull this professor right out of his classroom and into the middle of a global crisis. What exactly was this about? The 2016 explosion, the heavy price of viral fame. The spark that lit the fuse was Bill C-16, a Canadian law regarding gender identity and expression. When this law was passed, Jordan Peterson posted a series of videos on YouTube arguing that the government shouldn't force citizens to use specific words. He wasn't a politician, yet he suddenly found himself standing on the lawn of the University of Toronto, surrounded by shouting protesters and noisemakers. This was the moment that changed everything. Instantly, he became a symbol for free speech to some and a villain to others. Cameras captured the chaos, and within days, the quiet professor became the most talked about man on the internet. Jordan Peterson's rise to fame was like a meteor hitting the ocean. His old university lectures, which used to have a few hundred views, started racking up millions. He joined a group of thinkers called the Intellectual Dark Web, and his face was everywhere from news programs to late-night podcasts. People were hungry for his message about taking responsibility and cleaning your room. However, the world didn't see the behind-the-scenes cost of this sudden stardom. Peterson went from grading papers to flying across continents every few days. He was giving massive speeches in packed theaters while being chased by reporters at every airport. This was the period where he wrote the 12 Rules for Life phenomenon. The book became a global bestseller, and he was teaching millions how to organize their lives and find order in chaos. However, there was a deep irony growing during this time. While he told the world how to stay grounded, his own life was becoming a whirlwind of overextension. He was barely sleeping and constantly under fire from critics who picked apart his every word. The media pressure was relentless and the public scrutiny never took a day off. This kind of life creates a level of stress that most people can't imagine, and it started to weigh heavily on his physical health. As he became a titan of the public square, a devastating personal tragedy was about to bring his world crashing down in the most painful way possible. The benzodiazepine nightmare, a descent into chaos. The year 2019 was supposed to be a victory lap for Jordan Peterson. However, it turned into a living nightmare. The catalyst was a sudden and terrifying health crisis involving his wife Tammy. She was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of kidney cancer that had a very low survival rate for a man who built his entire career on the idea of standing tall during a storm. This was the ultimate test, and the stress on him was overwhelming. To manage the crushing anxiety of watching his wife fight for her life, Peterson began taking a prescribed medication called clonazepam. It is a common medication used for anxiety, but for Jordan Peterson, it became a chemical trap that his body could not escape.
Dad was put on a low dose of a benzodiazepine a few years ago for anxiety following an extremely severe autoimmune reaction to food.
His system did not only get used to the medicine, but his body also developed a severe physical dependence that turned his life into a neurological prison. When Peterson tried to stop taking this medication, his brain reacted with a level of violence that shocked his family because he developed a condition known as akathisia. This is a medical term for a type of restlessness that is almost impossible to describe. It feels like your entire nervous system is on fire and you have to move every second just to survive the pain. Many people who suffer from this describe it as a state of mind that is actually worse than death. He was trapped in a body that would not stop shaking and a mind that could no longer find peace. Since hospitals in North America offered few options for the kind of rapid detox he needed, the Peterson family made a high-stakes gamble. They flew to Moscow, Russia, to seek a radical treatment that Western doctors refused to perform. Once they got there, the medical teams placed him into a medically induced coma for 8 days. The goal was to let his brain reset while he was unconscious so he wouldn't have to endure the agony of withdrawal. It felt like a move straight out of a thriller movie. While he lay in that hospital bed thousands of miles from home, the rest of the world was left in the dark. During his months of silence, the internet was filled with speculation and gossip. Rumors began to swirl that the intellectual giant was gone for good. Some people claimed he had suffered permanent brain damage, while others whispered that he might never walk or speak again. It was a strange and quiet time for his millions of followers who were used to seeing him everywhere. They wondered if the man who taught them how to find meaning in suffering had finally been broken by his own. Against all odds, Jordan Peterson eventually woke up. However, the man who returned from Russia was not the same man who left his home before. The fragile resurrection and the professional pivot. After the intense treatment in Moscow, Jordan Peterson did not just come back to a normal life. His road to recovery was long and took him all the way to Belgrade, Serbia, where he spent months in a specialized clinic. It was a quiet and humble period of healing that the public didn't get to see. The first time fans finally got to see him again was in June 2020. He appeared in a very emotional video on his daughter Mikhaila's YouTube channel. He looked much thinner and older than people remembered. His voice, which used to be so powerful and steady, now had a slight tremble. He admitted that he was still learning how to walk again and that even typing a simple sentence was a struggle. It was a deeply human moment that showed a side of the professor the world had never seen before. He wasn't the invincible debater anymore. He was merely a father and a husband who had barely escaped with his life. By the time he finally made it back home to Toronto in October 2020, he was eager to get back to work. However, he soon realized that his old life at the university didn't fit him anymore. In early 2022, he wrote a public letter that shocked the academic community. In that letter, Peterson officially resigned from his position at the University of Toronto, ending his career as a traditional professor. He explained that he could no longer work in a system that he felt was more interested in politics than truth. This resignation was a huge turning point. He was walking away from a stable and respected job to step into the unknown. He wasn't just leaving a school, he was leaving the entire structure of his past life behind to build something new. This move led him straight into a massive partnership with the Daily Wire. He became a key part of their media team, which gave him a platform larger than any university could ever offer. He also started the Peterson Academy, a digital school designed to teach students without the distractions of modern campus politics. He was proving that he could still be a leader, even if he wasn't standing in a lecture hall. During this time, his focus also began to shift. He spent less time on viral debates and more time talking about faith, the Bible, and the deeper meaning of life. He released hours of content about the book of Exodus, trying to understand how people find their way through the desert of life. During this period also, Jordan Peterson continued to follow a strict diet he called Lion's Diet, a meal that consists of only beef, water, and salt. He claimed it was the only reason his brain was able to recover from the damage it had suffered. This sparked a lot of gossip online, with fans wondering if such an extreme lifestyle was actually helping or if it was putting too much pressure on his weakened body. After all these, Peterson seemed to be finally moving toward a peaceful chapter of his life. He was working, traveling, and spending time with his family again. But just as things were starting to look up, a new and invisible threat was waiting in the shadows. In early 2025, a sudden environmental health crisis would prove that his battle was far from over. At first glance, it seemed like Peterson had successfully rebuilt a version of his life that was both meaningful and sustainable. His lectures continued to draw massive audiences around the world, and his online presence only grew stronger. People who had followed his journey closely began to notice something different about him, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a quieter tone in his delivery, a deeper sense of reflection behind his words. The man who once thrived in high-intensity debates now appeared more measured, almost cautious, as if he fully understood how fragile everything could become in an instant. His relationship with his family also appeared to strengthen during this time. He frequently spoke about gratitude, resilience, and the importance of close personal bonds. Mikhaila, who had been by his side throughout his darkest moments, remained a central figure in both his recovery and his public life. Together, they shared parts of their journey, offering insights into health, discipline, and survival that resonated with millions of people facing their own struggles. At the same time, Peterson's growing involvement in independent media gave him a level of control he had never experienced within academia. He could now choose his topics freely, speak without institutional limits, and reach a global audience instantly. This freedom allowed him to explore more philosophical and spiritual questions, diving deeper into themes of suffering, redemption, and purpose. For many of his followers, this marked a new phase, less combative, but more introspective and, in some ways, more profound. The invisible enemy. What started as a helpful family gesture quickly turned into a life or death situation. While helping clean out a relative's house, Peterson was exposed to a severe amount of mold. Most people might just get a cough or some sniffles, but for someone with his medical history, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. This exposure triggered something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS. This is not a typical allergy. It is a condition where the body's immune system goes into a permanent state of high alert because it cannot process certain toxins. It was as if his body had forgotten how to turn off the alarm, leading to a massive internal meltdown. The situation spiraled out of control faster than anyone expected, and by August 2025, the inflammation had weakened his system so much that he developed a severe case of pneumonia. This quickly led to sepsis, which is a terrifying condition where the body starts attacking its own organs to fight off an infection. Peterson was rushed to the hospital and spent nearly a month in an intensive care unit. For much of that time, he was unable to communicate with his family, and the man who had spent years speaking to millions was suddenly trapped in a silent battle for his life in a hospital bed again. Doctors also diagnosed him with critical illness polyneuropathy, which is a type of nerve damage that causes extreme weakness and pain throughout the body. As news of his hospitalization leaked out, the internet began to buzz with rumors. Some fans noticed that in his few brief appearances, his voice sounded different. There was speculation that the illness or the medical tubes used during his ICU stay had permanently damaged his vocal cords. People began to wonder if the voice of a generation was being physically silenced by these constant health battles. It was a heartbreaking thought for his followers, who worried that he might never be able to deliver a lecture or record a podcast with the same energy again. While his family remained hopeful, the reality of his physical state was becoming harder to ignore. Jordan Peterson's recovery this time has been anything but easy. It is not a straight line toward getting better. Instead, it is a daily struggle with chronic pain and what some call neurological glitches. One day he might feel strong enough to work, and the next day he could be completely bedridden. This non-linear path has forced him to step back from the high-intensity lifestyle he once lived. He is dealing with a body that feels like a stranger to him, and every step forward feels like a massive victory. With his body failing for a second time in 5 years, the question shifts from what happened to what does this mean for his message. The philosophy of pain. Can he survive his own rules? Jordan Peterson has spent years telling people to pick up the heaviest burden they can carry and move forward. Now, he is being forced to live out that philosophy in a way that is truly heartbreaking. He calls it voluntary suffering, which is the idea that life is naturally difficult and you must choose to face it with strength. For Peterson, this is not a lecture anymore. It is his daily reality. Every morning, he wakes up with nerve pain and physical weakness, yet he still tries to write and share his thoughts. It is a massive test of his own rules for life. If he cannot survive this chaos, his critics might argue that his philosophy does not actually work when things get really bad. And normally, this would create a huge amount of pressure. You see, when you have millions of followers looking to you as a source of strength, you feel you cannot afford to be weak. He is the person who taught young men how to be pillars of their families. Today, he is the one who needs a pillar to lean on. And honestly, this shift is deeply personal. For the first time, the world is seeing how much he relies on his daughter, Mikhaila, and his wife, Tammy. They have become his protectors and his primary support system. It is a role reversal that is difficult for any leader to handle, especially someone as public as Peterson. The physical toll of these health battles finally caught up with his professional life in early 2026. Jordan Peterson had planned a massive tour called We Who Wrestle with God, with stops across Europe. However, the recovery from his 2025 crisis was moving much slower than anyone hoped, and it led to the abrupt cancellation of major shows in cities like Leeds, Frankfurt, and Berlin. Fans who had waited months to see him were left with empty tickets and growing concerns. It was a signal that his body could no longer keep up with the demands of a global speaking schedule. As rumors of a permanent retirement swirl, we must look at the evidence. Is the Peterson era coming to a close, or is a final chapter being written? The future. Well, since his family shared that he was facing a slow and scary recovery from a condition known as CIRS, it left many people wondering if his body could finally no longer keep up with his high energy schedule. For a man who built his brand on standing up straight with your shoulders back, seeing him forced into silence was a shock to his supporters. It seemed for a moment that the weight of legal battles and personal illness might have finally pushed him to the edge. Yet, the machine he built keeps moving even when he is resting. The Peterson Academy is the best example of this resilience. With 50,000 students enrolled as of March 2026, the digital university is thriving under the leadership of his daughter, Mikhaila. She has stepped up as the CEO, proving that the mission is bigger than one person. Even if the founder is away, the classes continue to reach a global audience. This raises a big question about whether a leader needs to be physically present to lead a movement in the modern age. We also have to consider the sheer weight of his past work. Even if he never records another video, books like 12 Rules for Life and Maps of Meaning have changed how millions of people look at the world. He moved the needle on the culture war in a way few others have. For many, his current struggle with health makes his message about voluntary suffering more powerful. They see a man who is actually living out the difficult lessons he taught. So, where do we stand in April 2026? The house is still standing, though the foundation is under massive pressure. He remains medically fragile and must deal with legal orders for remedial training from the College of Psychologists. Despite these hurdles, his digital reach is everywhere. Peterson is a man who is legally sanctioned yet digitally unstoppable. Do you think Jordan Peterson's journey an inspiration for the broken? Or is it all about the cost of fame and controversy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.